Sergeant Jack Calloway's eyes cracked open, his head pounding like he'd just headbutted a steel plate. A sharp, artificial light flooded his vision, casting sterile white reflections on the metallic walls of his prison. The stench of something acrid and synthetic clung to the air, burning the back of his throat. He was restrained, thick, segmented cuffs locked his wrists and ankles to a cold metal chair, their alien design pulsing with faint green energy. His uniform was torn, streaked with blood, some of it his, some of it not. The room was sparse, clinical, designed for one purpose. A single doorway stood across from him, the only break in the seamless metal walls. The low hum of an unseen power source vibrated beneath him, subtle but constant, like the breathing of some mechanical beast. He exhaled through his nose, steadying himself. Captured. Not the first time, probably not the last. But if they thought they could break him, they were in for a rude awakening. A figure entered, tall and broad, clad in the black and crimson war armor of the Zarkith Dominion. Its chitinous plates gleamed under the artificial lights, jagged ridges lining its powerful frame. The alien's reptilian eyes, slitted and deep amber, studied Jack with something between amusement and curiosity. "You are awake." Its voice was a rasping growl, translated smoothly through the device embedded in its collar. "Good. We can begin." Jack tilted his head, rolling his shoulders as much as his restraints allowed. "Gotta say, not the best hospitality. I'd give the cell a solid 3 out of 10. Maybe 4 if the bed's better than it looks." The alien's expression didn't change, but the slight twitch of its mandibles betrayed irritation. "Good." Jack had been dealing with bastards like this his whole career, arrogant warlords who thought intimidation was the same thing as power. "I am Commander Vrek," the creature said, stepping closer. "You are Jack Calloway, Sergeant of the 7th Expeditionary Force." Jack gave a slow blink. "I dunno, am I? You sure you got the right guy?" Vrek ignored him. "Your species is weak. Your minds are fragile, your body's inferior. Your endurance is laughable compared to our own." He leaned down, his presence an imposing wall of muscle and carapace. "But your people fight as if they believe otherwise." "I would know why." Jack met his gaze, unimpressed. "You ever hear of Earth boot camps?" Vrek straightened slightly, taken off guard by the response. "This is not a discussion. You will tell us what we need to know, or we will strip the truth from you." Jack clicked his tongue, nodding to the device mounted on the wall, an intricate web of needles, coils, and emitters bristling with latent energy. Classic alien pain amplifier. Jack had seen its kind before, usually in debriefs when Command wanted to scare rookies about what would happen if they were captured. "Let me guess," Jack said, tilting his head. "That thing's gonna make me feel like my insides are melting, right? Maybe fry my nervous system just enough to keep me alive but wishing I wasn't." He sighed. "Buddy, you don't need all that. If you wanted to torture me, just give me a plate of boot camp rations and a 30-pound pack to haul uphill." Vrek's mandibles clicked, puzzled. Jack smirked. The truth was he wasn't afraid. Not because he was some unshakable war hero, but because he had been through worse. Every soldier had. That was the point. Humans didn't break easy, not because they were the strongest, but because they were trained to endure the worst before they ever stepped foot on a battlefield. Vrek pressed a control on his wrist, and agony lanced through Jack's body. His muscles clenched, his nerves igniting in white-hot fire. His teeth ground together, but he refused to give the bastard the satisfaction of a scream. It lasted 5 seconds, 10 before the alien released the hold. Jack slumped forward, chest heaving, but when he lifted his head he was grinning. "You know," he rasped, "I once watched a recruit pass out standing up. Just dropped like a sack of rocks while the drill sergeant screamed in his face. Poor kid didn't even hit the ground, just stayed locked at attention, unconscious." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I think that's when I knew boot camp was gonna be hell." Vrek narrowed his eyes. "What nonsense is this?" Jack leaned back as much as his restraints allowed. "You want to know why humans fight like we do? Why we don't just roll over when things get tough?" He exhaled, lips quirking. "It's because we start breaking people long before we ever see combat. Not in a way that makes them weaker, but in a way that forces them to survive." Vrek pressed the control again. Another wave of pain. Longer this time. Jack's vision blurred at the edges, but he stayed upright. When it ended, he was panting, sweat slicking his skin, but he forced a smile. "That's cute," he said hoarsely. "You think this is bad? Try getting through a day with Sergeant Major Collins breathing down your neck." Vrek snarled. "You mock us." Jack shook his head. "Nope. Just giving you some perspective." His gaze drifted past Vrek to the guard standing by the doorway. Even through their impassive expressions, he could see the glimmer of uncertainty. They had been expecting a man begging for mercy. Instead, they were getting stories. Jack grinned. Let me tell you about Collins. Hardest son of a bitch I ever met. Could probably chew nails and spit out bullets. First day of training, he made us run until half the squad puked. You fell? You got back up. You failed? You did it again. He once made a guy carry another recruit's gear for a full week after he complained about his own load. You know what happened after that? That guy never complained again. That's what we do. We suffer until we don't break anymore. Vrek's mandibles twitched, but he said nothing. Jack saw the hesitation now, creeping into the cracks of his captor's confidence. He had expected resistance, defiance. But what he was getting was something worse, understanding. A slow, dawning realization that humans didn't just endure suffering. They thrived in it. Jack licked his lips. See, you think you're breaking me. You're not. You're just giving me something to compare to Collins. And between you and me, you don't even come close. Vrek's fist slammed into Jack's gut, knocking the breath from his lungs. Pain flared, but Jack just coughed out a laugh, his body still shaking from the residual torture. He let his head roll back against the chair, blinking up at the harsh lights. Nice shot, he wheezed. But Collins hit harder. The Zarkith commander snarled, turning away sharply, his claws clicking against the floor as he stalked toward the exit. Jack watched him go, his smirk lingering. He wasn't out of this yet. Not by a long shot. But the first crack had formed. And with a little time, cracks always got bigger. He exhaled through his nose, flexing his fingers against the restraints. They thought they could break him. They had no idea what they were dealing with. The first thing they took from you in boot camp was your name. Not literally, of course. It was still there, stitched into your uniform, printed on paperwork, but it didn't belong to you anymore. It belonged to the drill sergeant. And if he used it, it was never for anything good. Most of the time, you weren't even a person. You were a noise, a grunted acknowledgement, a mistake waiting to happen. The only thing you could control was how much worse you made it for yourself. Jack Calloway learned that the first morning of training, when Sergeant Major Collins strolled into the barracks at 0400, flipped a bunk with a recruit still inside and roared, "Get your sorry asses out of bed, ladies." It was chaos. Bodies scrambled, boots hit the floor, half-asleep recruits collided into each other, trying to process what was happening. Jack had been awake a minute before the explosion, anticipating it, but even he wasn't prepared for the force of Collins' presence. The man was built like a warship, all muscle and fury, his skin like leather baked under 1,000 suns. His voice could crack steel. Some poor bastard muttered something under his breath. Jack didn't catch what, but Collins did. The sergeant turned so fast it was like he'd teleported, his face an inch from the recruits. "What was that, sweetheart? Speak up." The recruit, a wiry kid from some colony out on Europa, stammered, "And nothing, sir." "Sir?" Collins' voice dripped with mockery. "Oh, you wound me. I work for a living, boy. Do I look like some desk-bound officer with a stick up his ass?" The recruit had no right answer and everyone knew it. The tension was a blade, sharp and waiting. Collins leaned back, a slow, exaggerated motion. "You know what? I like you. You're gonna do great things here. You look like you got real leadership potential." For a half-second, hope flickered in the recruit's eyes. Collins crushed it. "That's why for the next week you're in charge of cleaning every toilet on base. With your toothbrush." Silence. Then, "Well?" Collins bellowed. "What do you say?" The recruit swallowed. "Just thank you, Sergeant Major." "Don't thank me, son. Thank your dumbass mouth for getting you into this." Collins turned to the rest of them, scanning their faces with an intensity that could peel paint. "Every single one of you is weak, soft, unfit for combat. And I'm gonna fix that. You'll hate me for it, but you'll thank me when you're still breathing and the poor bastards who didn't train like you are rotting in the dirt." Jack didn't doubt him for a second. By noon he had already cycled through every possible stage of regret. The morning had been a whirlwind of running, screaming, burpees, and push-ups until his arms were shaking. Breakfast had been 5 minutes long enough to shovel unidentifiable slop into his mouth before it was time for another round of drills. Then came the obstacle course. Jack learned 2 things that day. 1. Climbing a rope was infinitely harder when your limbs felt like they were filled with molten lead. 2. Sergeant Major Collins had a sixth sense for weakness, and he exploited it with the precision of a scalpel. Halfway up the rope, Jack's grip faltered. His arms trembled, sweat slicking his palms. He clenched his teeth, trying to force himself higher. Collins appeared below, arms crossed. "What's the matter, princess?" Gravity too tough for you? Jack forced another inch. You got 3 seconds to make it to the top, Collins said. Or you start over. Jack gritted his teeth. His muscles screamed. 3. He yanked himself up another inch. 2. His grip slipped. 1. He didn't make it. Collins let out a sigh, disappointed but not surprised. Get down, Calloway. Jack slid down in defeat, barely able to keep himself upright. Collins loomed over him. You think this is hard? Jack didn't answer. Collins gestured to the rest of the recruits, who were either watching in sympathy or just grateful it wasn't them. Do any of you know what happens when you fail a mission? No one spoke. Collins leaned in. People die. The weight of those words hit harder than any insult. Collins straightened. You don't get to quit just because it hurts. You push through it. Now start over. Jack did. He failed again. And again. And again. By the time he made it to the top, his body felt like it had been broken and rebuilt from the ground up. But he had made it. And that was the point. Jack snapped back to the present, the cold of the interrogation room pressing into his skin like needles. His wrists ached from the restraints, his body worn and battered from Vrek's continued efforts. But his mind was still sharp. Vrek stood in front of him, silent, studying. You don't look as smug, Jack rasped. His throat was dry, his voice rough, but the grin came easy. Something wrong? Vrek's mandibles twitched. You should be broken by now. Jack chuckled, the sound raw. Maybe you're just not as scary as you think. Vrek exhaled through his nose, a deep, irritated sound. Pain is universal. No species can resist it forever. Jack tilted his head. You ever stand in a freezing lake at 3 in the morning, holding your rifle over your head while a man built like a grizzly bear screams at you? Vrek frowned. Jack smirked. Didn't think so. The Zarkith commander paced, his frustration growing. Jack could see the doubt forming. The cracks widening. Good. You think suffering is a weakness, Jack continued. You think that if you apply enough pressure, everything will break. But that's not how we work. Pain doesn't make us weaker, it makes us stronger. Because we don't have a choice. Vrek stopped. You cannot convince me that humans enjoy suffering. Jack laughed, low and genuine. No. We hate it. But we don't run from it. He leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed. You want to know why we fight so damn hard? Why we don't break when we should? His gaze locked onto Vrek's, unwavering. Because we've already been through hell. And we survived. Vrek said nothing. Jack grinned. He had him. Jack could see it now, the hesitation in Vrek's posture, the way his mandibles twitched before he spoke, the flicker of something dangerously close to doubt in his reptilian eyes. The mighty commander of the Zarkith Dominion, self-proclaimed master of pain, was beginning to realize his mistake. He had captured a human expecting screams, begging, perhaps even death. What he got instead was a man who grinned through agony and told stories like he was reminiscing about old friends. Jack's wrists ached against the restraints, the skin raw where the alien cuffs bit into his flesh. His body was battered, bruised from countless shocks, but none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the crack forming in Vrek's confidence. It was small, nearly imperceptible, but Jack knew from experience. Once a crack started, it only got bigger. You are lying, Vrek said at last, his voice quieter than before but no less firm. No species endures pain willingly. Jack exhaled, rolling his shoulders as much as he could. See, that's where you're wrong. We don't endure it because we enjoy it. We endure it because we have to. He let his head tilt back slightly, staring at the ceiling as if he were watching a distant memory play out above him. I ever tell you about the Crucible? Vrek didn't respond, but Jack wasn't really asking. The Crucible, he continued, is the last test you take before earning the right to be called a soldier. 54 hours of pure hell. Sleep deprivation, forced marches, combat drills, no food, barely any water. If you're lucky, you hallucinate. If you're not, your body just stops listening to you. He glanced back at Vrek, smiling faintly. I remember this one guy, Ramirez. Good guy. Tough. But by the last night he was gone, dead on his feet, eyes empty. He started talking to his mom. Problem was, his mom wasn't there. Vrek's mandibles clicked. This is meant to intimidate me? Jack smirked. No, it's meant to educate you. He could feel the room shifting, the energy changing. The guards by the door weren't just standing at attention anymore, they were listening. Jack had fought enough battles to know when morale was cracking. It wasn't just his they had to worry about. The Zarkith soldiers had walked into this believing themselves superior. Now they were hearing things they'd never imagined. Ramirez wanted to quit. Jack continued, voice steady. We all did. But you know what happens when you hit that wall? When every inch of your body is telling you to stop. He leaned forward slightly, eyes locked onto Vrek. You push past it, and you come out the other side stronger. Vrek's jaw tightened. Your words mean nothing. Then why are you still listening? Jack shot back. Silence. The power had shifted. Jack felt it, tasted it in the air. The beatings, the torture, none of it had broken him. And that terrified them. Vrek took a slow step forward. What do you want, human? Jack let out a low chuckle. What? I want you to realize that this, he nodded toward the torture devices lining the walls, is pointless. You think pain is the great equalizer, but that's your biggest mistake. Pain doesn't break people. Fear does. And you don't scare me. The words hung there, heavy, undeniable. One of the guards shifted, his grip on his weapon loosening slightly. The other, younger looking, glanced at Vrek as if waiting for some kind of reassurance. Jack exhaled sharply. I don't think you'd last a day in boot camp, Commander. Vrek stiffened. His mandibles twitched, but there was no immediate retort. Jack tilted his head. Don't like that idea, huh? Funny. You dragged me in here, put me through all this, and now you're the one getting uncomfortable. But let's be honest, you wouldn't make it past the first hour. The second Colin saw you, he'd chew you up and spit you out. And that's before he even made you run. Vrek's fists clenched. You think yourself invincible? Jack's grin widened. No. I think I'm trained. The younger guard near the door took a half step back. He was rattled. Jack could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his eyes darted toward Vrek, unsure. Jack filed that away for later. Vrek inhaled slowly, regaining some of his composure. You are still our prisoner. Jack nodded. Yeah. For now. Vrek's eyes narrowed. You truly believe you will escape? Jack shrugged as best he could. Maybe. Maybe not. But here's the thing, you can keep shocking me, keep hitting me, but you're not gonna break me. And that means you've already lost. The commander held his gaze for a long, tense moment. Then, without a word, he turned sharply on his heel and strode toward the exit. The younger guard hesitated before following, casting one last, uncertain glance at Jack before disappearing through the door. Jack let out a slow breath, his muscles still aching, his vision still hazy at the edges. But his smile never faded. The cracks were spreading. And soon, something was going to break. The silence that followed Vrek's departure was thick, almost suffocating. Jack sat still in the chair, muscles burning, mind racing. The restraints bit into his wrists, the cold metal pressing deep into raw flesh, but the pain barely registered anymore. What mattered was the shift in the air, the way the guards had hesitated. Doubt was a slow poison, and Jack had injected it right into the heart of the Zarkith ranks. He let out a slow breath, steadying himself. The young guard from earlier had looked rattled, unsure, questioning. That was an opening, a sliver of weakness in the otherwise rigid discipline of the Zarkith. If he could widen that crack, turn it into something bigger, then maybe, just maybe, he could tip the scales. The door slid open again. Jack expected Vrek, maybe another round of pointless torture. Instead, it was the younger guard, the uncertainty still shadowing his reptilian features. He hesitated just inside the threshold, glancing back over his shoulder before stepping forward. Jack kept his expression neutral, watching. You do not fear pain, the guard said at last, his voice quieter than Vrek's, lacking the same hard edge. Jack smirked. I fear plenty of things. Pain just isn't one of them. The guard shifted, mandibles twitching. You said our methods are useless. That fear is stronger than pain. Jack studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his claws flexed slightly at his sides. He was grappling with something dangerous. Jack had seen that look before. Fresh recruits questioning orders, soldiers realizing the truth about the war they had signed up for. Yeah, Jack said finally. And I meant it. The guard exhaled sharply, his gaze flickering to the restraints around Jack's wrists. Vrek believes he can break you. He thinks enough suffering will make you surrender. Jack chuckled. Vrek's an idiot. The guard stiffened, but Jack caught the faintest hint of amusement behind his amber eyes. He was young, too young to have the same ironclad loyalty as the older soldiers. Maybe he had seen things he wasn't supposed to. Maybe he had started asking the wrong questions. You speak of your training as if it is something to be proud of, the guard said. As if suffering is a gift. Jack shrugged. Not a gift. Just necessary. He met the guard's gaze. The universe doesn't care about us. It doesn't care if we're tired or hungry or scared. It keeps coming. If you're not ready, you die. Simple as that. The guard said nothing but his claws flexed again. Jack could feel it, hesitation curdling into something else. "What's your name?" Jack asked. The Zarkith stiffened, caught off guard. "I am a soldier of the Dominion." "Yeah, I got that. But what's your name?" The pause was long. "Tarek." Jack nodded. "Well, Tarek, let me ask you something. You ever been pushed past your limit?" Tarek frowned. "We train from hatching. We fight from the moment we can stand. That's not what I asked." Jack leaned forward slightly, the restraints groaning against the motion. "I mean really pushed. To the point where your body shuts down, your mind screams for you to stop, and you keep going anyway. Not because you want to. Because you have to." Tarek hesitated. Jack smiled. "Yeah. Didn't think so." Tarek's mandibles twitched. "You think yourself stronger than us?" Jack shook his head. "Not stronger. Just harder to kill." He nodded toward the door. "You know I'm right. That's why you're here. Why you're talking to me instead of letting Vrek keep frying my brain. You're starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, you backed the wrong side." Tarek inhaled sharply, his claws clenching into fists. "You do not understand." "Don't I?" Jack's voice was quiet now, steady. "You're standing here, talking to a prisoner, questioning your own commander. If you really believed in this war and Vrek, you wouldn't be here." Tarek's breathing quickened. Jack could see the war raging behind his eyes, the years of discipline fighting against something deeper. "You can do something about it," Jack said. "Or you can walk out that door and pretend you don't hear the screams in the next room." The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Then, slowly, Tarek reached for his belt. A second later, the restraints around Jack's wrists and ankles clicked open. The sudden release sent a jolt through his stiff muscles, but Jack forced himself to stay still, waiting. Tarek stepped back, expression unreadable. "You have one chance. Do not waste it." Jack grinned, flexing his hands. "Oh, don't worry. I won't." The next few moments were a blur. Jack moved fast, faster than they expected. One guard went down hard, Jack slamming his elbow into the soft point beneath his chin. The second barely had time to react before Jack had his weapon, flipping it in his hands and firing a clean, precise shot. Tarek didn't move, didn't interfere. He just watched as Jack turned toward him, weapon raised. Jack held his gaze for a moment. Then, slowly, he lowered the rifle. "You coming with me?" he asked. Tarek hesitated. Then, with a quiet breath, he nodded. Jack smirked. "Good choice." Alarms blared as they stepped into the corridor, the ship waking up to the chaos unfolding within its walls. Jack rolled his shoulders, gripping the rifle a little tighter. It was time to go. And this time he wasn't leaving alone.